Thus, we return to illuminated manuscripts. And what we're looking at specifically is called the Barry Bible. And we're seeing at this time a growing number of artists, secular artists, working outside of the monasteries, frequently in shops. And it's argued amongst scholars and believed by most scholars that many of these pieces are created by women, and then the master of the shop, who's usually a male, will sign it or otherwise take credit for it. So we are frequently seeing feminine art in these cases. Now, what we're seeing is this scene from the Barry Bible. Both scenes are Old Testament scenes that are framed in here. At the top, we have Moses and Aaron proclaiming the law to the Israelites. This is Moses having come down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, and now he's giving these laws to the Israelites. And we know this is Moses because you'll notice, you'll notice that he has horns. And you'll think, well, that's kind of odd. Why would Moses have horns? But remember, Moses never gets to go to the promised land because he doubts God while in the desert. Specifically doubts that God can make water spring forth from a rock when he strikes it with his staff. Therefore, he's depicted with horns. And in the lower image, what we're seeing is Moses pointing out clean and unclean beasts. This is from the book of Leviticus, and he's basically giving them rabbinical kosher law at this point, telling them what they can and can't eat. And the most common theory attached to this is that it all comes down to where the Israelites are from. When you look at the desert, there are certain creatures you just don't want to eat. For example, pigs, because they carry parasites. Shellfish, because in the desert, shellfish have a span of maybe an hour or two that you can eat them. After that point, they'll probably kill you. So there's a lot of ideas here. The idea of mixing meat and dairy. Imagine again a desert with no refrigeration. You're asking for food poisoning. So a lot of people will argue that this is basic food safety. But we're seeing effectively the book of Leviticus depicted in these two images. In terms of style, we see these very delicate gestures. We see a sense of movement integrated into them. Moses pointing up in the first scene with Aaron kind of tilted over, looking over his shoulder at him. And Moses in the second scene pointing down at the animals. We see these dignified figures. There's still patterning to the clothing that makes it obvious that they're not working from model, but yet it's having more of a sense of life about it. We also see a sense of volume. They're adding light and shadow to give us some sense of three-dimensionality, especially in the clothing. The second piece we're looking at is the Eadwine Psalter. And what we're seeing here is Eadwine, who's an English monk and scribe. And this is the rare portrait of a scribe, giving us an idea of what they were doing. Now, this is probably not a specific portrait. This is probably a generic type. This is sort of a monk, because to them and to a lot of artists, it doesn't matter what someone actually looks like. It matters that you capture the idea of the person. So frequently, this is where the Greeks get the idea of idealizing the figure. The Romans do similar things with verism. Here, they're just not worried about what does Eadwine actually look like. They're more interested in who he is. And what he's holding here are a pair of tools. The one in the right hand is actually a quill, so that's his pen. The other one on the left is a bone tool. It looks like it has a blade to it, and it does. It's kind of a dull blade. And he's writing in a parchment book. Now with parchment, if you run that dull blade along the paper, along the parchment, it will leave an impression, in this case, of a straight line. And then he'll use that to write in a straight line across the page, and eventually that line will disappear in most cases. As we look around the image, we see scripture written in Latin around it. And then we have a form in that border that looks very much like a cross between sort of the vine work and acanthus work that you would expect from Italy, mixed with the Irish knotwork that we looked at in the very earliest medieval. Now, in terms of symbolism, you'll notice he's sitting on this very architectural seat, and the bottom of his lectern is similar. This is representing the kingdom of heaven. This does not mean that he is Jesus. Rather, it's to get across the idea that this is the sacred word that he's writing. What he's writing is something different than simply copying a book, that it's something more, something spiritual.